Recently, Tesla Charging announced that its V4 Supercharger posts could now deliver up to 325 kilowatts. That's 30% more power than they previously were able to, and 30% more power than what the typical V3 Tesla Supercharger can deliver, which is a little bit more than 250 kilowatts. Now, the Tesla Model S, Model X, Model Y, and Model 3 can only accept about 250 kilowatts. So for those vehicles, it really doesn't matter. But for Tesla Cybertruck owners, it does matter because that vehicle is built on an 800-volt architecture. It can accept a lot more power than the 250 kilowatt limit Tesla Superchargers could previously deliver. And people have made videos online showing Cybertruck charging at much higher rates on other networks that can deliver up to 1,000 volts. Now, I recently did a Tesla Cybertruck Supercharger video where I charged a vehicle from 0 to 100%, did my full charging analysis. But I had quite a few followers reach out to me and say, hey, Tom, did you see that now the new V4 posts can deliver up to 325 kilowatts? The Cybertruck should be able to charge a lot faster. Could you please maybe redo your tests now that the vehicle should charge faster? So what I did was I borrowed a Tesla Cybertruck from a friend here in New Jersey, and I did two 10% to 80% recordings. One on a true Tesla V3 Supercharger and another one on one of the new V4 sites that has the new V4 cabinets or the V4 posts. But it is important to note these aren't true V4 Tesla Supercharger sites yet, because while the post itself is new, it has longer cable also, which is good for non-Tesla vehicles. The actual chargers, the cabinets that provide the power to the posts aren't the V4 cabinets yet. So these are kind of called V3.5 Tesla Superchargers. Tesla has said, I believe before the end of this year, they're going to start installing true V4 Superchargers, and those will be able to deliver even more power. So in this video, I'm going to try to discover exactly how much faster charging a Tesla Cybertruck on a V3.5 supercharger with a V4 dispenser is than if you charge it on a V3 Tesla Supercharger. Let's get into it. It only takes 1 minute of charging to see the V3.5 charger jump out in front because it's already pulling over 300 kilowatt, while the V3 Supercharger is delivering 256 kilowatt to the Cybertruck. The V3.5 station continues to provide over 300 kilowatt for only 3.5 minutes, and then it begins to derate for 2 more minutes. And after 5.5 minutes of charging, the Cybertruck is now pulling 256 kilowatt on both superchargers. Now, I've stopped the video here because from this point on, the two charging sessions are just about identical. You may see a slight difference in the real-time recording here, but that's only because the V3.5 supercharger is about 2% state of charge ahead. Now, I know the screen shows 3% more, 26% to 29%, but that's because the V3.5 just turned 29%. And as soon as I start the recording back up, you'll see the V3 recording jump to 27%. So there's really only slightly more than a 2% state of charge lead at this point, which you're going to see start to erode. Now I'm going to start the recording back up now and speed things up a bit because there really isn't much to see. We'll then look at the charging curves on paper to see just how similar these two sessions were. Now, I will note that the V3.5 session reached 50% in 14 minutes, while the V3 took 1 minute longer. And for the rest of the session, the V3 is just about 1 minute behind the V3.5. Now, the V3.5 finishes the 10 to 80% charging session in 35 minutes and 6 seconds. Not very impressive. While the V3 took 36 minutes and 18 seconds. You will also note that the Cybertruck indicated 1 more kilowatt hour was delivered during the V3 session, 86 kilowatt hour to 85 kilowatt hour. I started both sessions just as the state of charge dropped to 10%, so they really should have had nearly identical starting points. It is possible that the difference was only a fraction of a kilowatt hour, like 85.4 kilowatt hour to 85.7 kilowatt hour, which would be enough for the Cybertruck to round up to the next kilowatt hour on the display. But since the display doesn't show tenths, I'm just going to assume that was the case. Okay, so for those asking me to do this comparison, you have your answer. It's really not much of a difference. A minute faster from 10% to 80%. Yeah, if you stay for a shorter period of time, there's a little bit of bigger gap. If you can plug in at a low state of charge, it might save 2 or 3 minutes. If you're only charged just for 10 minutes or so and you just need a little bit of a boost, that's because the V3.5 Supercharger is going to deliver that higher power, but just as you could see, for about 5 minutes. And then it actually meets the same charging curve as the V3, which we're going to look at next on paper, the charging curves. But I did want to point out that once Tesla has fully operational V4 supercharger stations, and again, this was just a V4 post with a V3 cabinet, so that's why they call them V3.5. It's really, Tesla does not have any true V4 supercharger stations in the US yet. But when they do, they will be able to charge the Cybertruck faster. But currently, you can charge a Cybertruck faster, just not on Tesla superchargers. You have to go to other networks, which is kind of crazy because for all the years, Tesla had such a lead with their vehicles charging and also their charging network. But it's kind of have flipped now. And some of the other networks can deliver more power than Tesla superchargers. And a lot of the other EVs on the market now can accept more power and charge faster than Tesla vehicles. So where Tesla was clearly in the lead charging both the vehicles and the charging equipment, that's changed over the last couple of years. They're no longer the industry leaders. Yes, the supercharger network is still the best, most comprehensive network, but things are starting to change in this, and it's going to be interesting to watch this space in the next few years. But if you did want to charge your Cybertruck faster, you can go to other networks that have higher power stations, 1,000-volt stations. Now Ionna's coming out with 400 kilowatt stations, so you'd be able to charge your Cybertruck faster. Even Electrify America and EVgo stations can charge Cybertrucks faster than the Tesla superchargers can, but you need an adapter to do that. So you'd need a CCS1 to NACS adapter. And these are the CCS1 to NACS adapters that have been on the market for a long time. If you own a Tesla, you might have one of these already for your Model S, Model Y, Model 3, Model X. And this works on those vehicles, but it won't work on the Cybertruck. And that's because the Cybertruck's fender flare, where the charge port is really thick. And this little locking mechanism here has to depress in when you insert this in your Cybertruck. It won't reach because of the thickness of the fender flare. So some companies, A to Z in particular, which is what I have here, made a Cybertruck specific, a CCS1 to NACS adapter. You notice this longer pin here for the locking mechanism. So what that allows is you can reach the charge port and also have this lock the adapter, because charging can't start unless this pin is depressed in and the adapter is locked. I made a video on this about 2 months ago here on State of Charge. I'll drop the link to that video in the description of this video. If you have a Cybertruck and you want to get one of these adapters, remember, you can't just go online and buy a CCS1 to NACS adapter. They will not work. You need a specific Tesla Cybertruck CCS1 to NACS adapter. Okay, with that said, let's take a look at the charging charts for these two charging sessions. We'll compare them. We'll see just how close they are, and they're extremely close. So the moral of this story at the end of this video is just going to be, look, really doesn't matter. Don't seek out V4 superchargers, or they call them V4 stations at this time, even though they're really V3.5, because it's just not worth it, especially if you plug in, say, at above 25%, your charging session will be identical. You only get that little bit of an advantage if you plug in the V3.5 at a very low state of charge. Okay, onto the charts. This video was sponsored by Cubertruck, North America's premier installer of electric vehicle charging equipment. After I've helped you decide which electric vehicle charger you're going to buy, follow the link in the description of my videos and have Cubertruck install it. And if you follow that link, Cubertruck will waive the $150 installation deposit. But in order to have the deposit waived, you must follow the link in the description of my videos. All right, so first let's take a look at the V3 charging session charging curve. Now this is the charging power chart where on the x-axis you'll see the state of charge by percentage and the y-axis has the charging power in kilowatts. As soon as we plug in at 10%, boom, within a minute we're up over 250 kilowatts to around 256 kilowatts. It holds that pretty straight line to about 29% state of charge where the charging curve gradually lowers down, and once we get to around 65% state of charge, that's when it levels off at around 90 kilowatts and holds that up until the 80% state of charge point. Now let's overlay the charging session on the V3.5 Supercharger. That's shown in red now, and the V3 Supercharger session is in black. You can see, man, is this identical. I like that. I like repeatable, consistent charging curves, and you get that with Tesla. So what you can see here is on the earliest part of charging, that first 5.5 minutes, this is the area that you get those extra kilowatt hour. But it's only about 2.5 extra kilowatt hour. That's it. So you're really not getting that much. It looks nice on the chart, but you saw what it really translated to. And what it really means is if you're going to charge for 5 or 6 minutes, if you only need an extra 50, 60 miles of range or something like that, then it makes a little sense to plug in at a V3.5 Supercharger. I mean, certainly wouldn't make sense if you had to drive out of your way to go there. But if there was a choice and they were both along your route and you just needed to add a little bit of range, yeah, the V3.5 is going to give you a little bit extra. But once you start staying there longer, it really spreads out that advantage. And when you get to the end, it's kind of irrelevant. You only gained about a minute of your time. And these two charging session comparisons really prove that out. Okay, next up, let's take a look at the time to charge charts. Okay, so here's my charging time chart. And on the x-axis on this graph, you'll see charging time in minutes. And on the y-axis, it's the state of charge by percentage. You can see here we started at 10% state of charge. We finished up after either 35 minutes on the V3.5 Supercharger or 36 minutes on the V3 Supercharger, which is in black, and the V3.5 Supercharger session is in red. Now, what we want to see on this chart is a very vertical climb, more than a horizontal. And that means you're adding kilowatt hour to the battery pack faster. You can see in the beginning, the climb is more vertical, and particularly that first 5 to 5.5 minutes. And in that period is when the V3.5 Supercharger gets its advantage over the V3 Supercharger. And you can see the separation there. But from there on out, the lines are nearly parallel. So you really only get that little bit in the beginning, and then the charging curve's exactly the same. And now let me add my miles per minute lines. If the charging curve was able to hold these lines, you could see it would be adding 15 miles a minute here, 10 miles per minute here, which it did hold in the beginning for a while. And then the low end, 5 miles per minute. I usually like to say anything under 5 miles per minute is very slow, and you shouldn't really waste your time DC fast charging if you're not getting at least 5 miles per minute. 10 miles per minute is a good rate. So the Cybertruck actually holds that for a little while, which is good, but unfortunately not for too long. So now let's just take a look at how many miles per minute of charging are added in 3 sections. The first 10 minutes of charging, the second 10 minutes of charging, and the third 10 minutes of charging. And I also have the range based on, well, I have EPA range here, but Tesla hasn't officially certified the Cybertruck with the EPA, but they have established that they believe 325 miles is what the EPA range rating will be. So that's what I'm going to use there. I also had the opportunity to do a 70 mile an hour highway range test with the Cybertruck, in which I ended up getting 302 miles of range before the battery was exhausted. So I'm going to use those two as the basis to talk about how many miles per minute of charging is added. And I also need to point out that I am using the V3.5 Supercharger recording to demonstrate the range replenishing rate. In the first 10 minutes of charging, we averaged 10.3 miles of range added for every minute of charging. It's actually very good. If you want to use my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test as your basis, a little bit less, which would be 9.6 miles of range added for every minute of charging. From the 10-minute point to the 20-minute point, you can see how it's slowing down already. Only 6.2 miles of range added for every minute of charging. 5.8 miles of range if you use my range test. Again, this isn't bad, but now after 20 minutes of charging, that's when it falls into the bad category. From the 20-minute point to 30 minutes of charging, we only averaged 4.3 miles of range added for every minute of charging based on Tesla's 325-mile estimate, and only 4 miles of range added for every minute of charging if you want to use my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test as your basis. That's not good. Once you've been charging for about 20 minutes with a Tesla Cybertruck on a Tesla Supercharger of any variety, you're really not getting a lot of power pumped into the pack. And this is where Tesla could really improve and give us some more power deeper into the pack, in my opinion. Next up, we're going to take a look at how long it takes to add miles of driving range based both on Tesla's EPA estimate and my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test. You will note there's only a red line on here. That's because I'm only using the V3.5 Supercharger test for this graph. I don't think I needed to do it for the other graph completely because the numbers are so close. But at the end, I'm going to show you really quickly what those numbers look like. Okay, they had 50 miles of range EPA. It took 4.2 minutes. According to my range test, a little bit more, 4.6 minutes. 100 miles of range comes in 9.3 minutes and 10.4 minutes. 150 miles of range, 16.8 minutes and 18.7 minutes. And 200 miles of range comes in 27.1 minutes and 30.9 minutes if you want to use my highway range test as your metric. I typically talk about how long it takes an EV to add 200 miles of range. This isn't great. It's about a half an hour on the Tesla Cybertruck, but we do have to understand it is a big, heavy pickup truck. It's not a low-slung sedan, which is going to be much more efficient, and that helps with adding miles of driving range. Still, I'd love to see Tesla get this down to around 20 minutes. A half an hour to add 200 miles of driving range isn't terrible, but Tesla, being a leader in this field, should be able to squeeze it out a little bit better than that. Okay, and as promised, I added the charging curve on the V3 Supercharger here. I'm not going to go through all the numbers. You can see it's very similar. If you want to take a screenshot of that, go right ahead. I just wanted to provide that so you could see just how close the numbers are. Next up, we're going to take a look at the C rate. Now, the C rate of a battery is the speed at which it can discharge or charge relative to the size of the battery. If you were to have a 1 C rate, you would be able to fully recharge the battery from 0 to 100% in exactly an hour. If the battery had a 2 C rate, you would be able to fully charge it from 0 to 100% in 30 minutes or half an hour. So a higher C rate means that the EV charges faster. Now, if you look at this chart, it's the same charging curve as the charging power chart. The only difference is the y-axis here has the C rate as opposed to the charging power in kilowatts. So it's plotted out the same. It's just we're looking for something different with this chart. Now you could tell the majority of this charging session was between 1 and 2 C rate. And that would lead you to think that, okay, over the average of this whole charging session, the Cybertruck probably averaged about 1.5 C rate. But that's not true because that wouldn't be considering time. And at the higher state of charge, the vehicle charged a lot slower. So as you could see here, once the vehicle was at 60% state of charge, it dropped below a 1 C rate. But it looks like that was only a short period of time. However, it's actually almost as long as the rest of the charging session. You could see here from 10% to 60% took 19 minutes. But then from 60% to 80% took 16 minutes, almost as long. So that really dragged down the overall C rate. The average C rate for this charging session here was just around 1.2. If we had stopped the charging session at 60%, then it would have been different. It would have been higher. It would have been about 1.5. But again, this is just a snapshot, 10 to 80%. If we were to charge 0 to 100%, it would have been much lower, probably well under a 1 C rate. And finally, and yes, I promise this is the last chart I'm going to show you today. This is my master charging chart for this session. Actually, I'm using the V3.5 Supercharger charging session for this. And in this chart, it breaks up the entire charging session into 10% blocks. On the y-axis is the final state of charge, and the x-axis is the starting state of charge. So you could look at from 40% to 50%, or from 30% to 70%, and find that block, and you'll see in that specific period that you're looking at, you'll see how long it took to charge, how many state of charge percentage points were added, how much range was added according to EPA, what was the average charging power for that section, and how many kilowatt hour was added in that session. Now the boxes have different colors. Brighter green is better because that means it's charging faster. If it's a really bright green, it's charging 80 to 100% of its maximum charging rate, which in this case is 325 kilowatts. A little bit darker green, 60 to 79%. A beige color, 40 to 59%. And orange is 20 to 39%. And if it's red, that means it's charging very slowly at less than 20% of the maximum charging rate. Now, I'm not going to go through all these boxes here, but I will take a look at the full charging session block, which would be in the lower left-hand corner. That represents 10% to 80%. It took us 35 minutes. We added 70% of the battery and added 228 miles of EPA rated range. The average charging power over this whole charging session was 152 kilowatts. Now, the Cybertruck has a 123 kilowatt hour battery pack. That's how you see the C rate was right around 1.2, because the battery size is 123 kilowatt hour, but we averaged 152 kilowatts of charging power during this time, which is about 20% more than the overall battery size. And we added 86 kilowatt hour. Actually, I probably should have put 85 there, because in the V3.5 charging session, we only added 85 kilowatt hours. So little mistake over there. But as I mentioned earlier, we're probably talking like 0.3 kilowatt hours. So I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. All right, well, that's all I have here today on the 10 to 80% Tesla Cybertruck charging comparison, V3 versus V3.5. The end result is pretty clear. It doesn't matter if you go to a V3 or a V3.5. It'll make almost no difference in your charging time, unless, of course, you're only going to stay for 7 or 8 minutes and you're going to plug in at a very low state of charge, under 15% state of charge. Then you're going to save a minute or two, or maybe be able to go an extra 7 or 8 miles as compared to a V3. The real test is going to be once Tesla starts installing the true V4 cabinets, which are supposed to happen sometime in 2025. That should make a big difference. The V4 posts themselves are better in that they have the longer cables. I don't really love how the connector docks, though. It doesn't seem like it's as robust a docking situation as the V3s were, and I've already seen V4 stations with the connector lying on the ground because it either fell out or the person couldn't holster the connector properly. So I think there's some work to be done there, but the length of the cables is a good addition. Now the cables are long enough to reach the charge port on non-Tesla vehicles, which As most people know at this point, Tesla's opened up their network to the other companies, and their charge points are not located in the optimal location, so they have to take up 2 charging bays to charge. But with the V4 posts, they don't have to do that. The cables are much longer, and you reach almost any area of the vehicle, so the vehicle can charge in the correct stall. Okay, well, that's all we have here today for the V3 versus V3.5. If this is your first time here at State of Charge, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming electric vehicle news and reviews. And as always, thanks for watching.